Hello and welcome to the 7th instalment of this exciting series of shows sponsored by Dublin City Comics and Collectibles, where we, the Full Force, take an in-depth look at the old Action Force comics in no particular order. This is a doubly special episode thanks to Hooded Cobra Commander 788 for inviting us to create some special content in the month of July for Cobra Convergence 4. What better way to celebrate this 4th of July than to hear the story of how Baron Ironblood was once a man. Was once a man. I am Chris, World Enema Number 1 McLeod, aka Diagnostic 80, and joining me on this new episode, as always, is Brian, World Enema Number 2 Hickey. So let's get on with it, shall we? Explosion.
This order of battle turns blue for the 4th epic Cobra Convergence event with a look at the Battle Action Force comic story that turned Baron Ironblood into Cobra Commander. World Enemy Number 1! Originally published in Battle Action Force over 7 issues from 19th January to 2nd of March 1985.
Credits include writer Jerry Day, artist John Cooper, letterer Peter Knight, colours John Michael Cajagal, Jim Marshall, Matthew Paternoster, Scott Perret or Scott Perrett, and Flavio Silvestri for the coloured version on Blood for the Baron.
For the cast in this, we have Red Shadow Troopers, Cobra Troopers, Baron Ironblood / Cobra Commander, Red Jackal / Destro, Storm Shadow, Major Blood, Firefly, and the Red Shadow's Hyena.
A senior general from Action Force, SAS Force Captain Charles Richard Buckingham, Eagle, SAS Force Paratroopers,
Z-Force Captain Grant Campbell, aka Skip, Z-Force Fritz Van Eyck, aka Wheels, Z-Force Calvin Mondale, aka Jammer, and the Z-Force Jeep.
Q-Force Captain Jamie Hugh McLaren, Leviathan, Q-Force Gareth Morgan, also known as Dolphin, and the Q-Force Sea Lion.
And Space Commander Charles Chuck Connors, otherwise known as Sky Radar.
And then a huge amount of others: New York Police, United Nations officials, Japanese Marines, Russian Paras, Gulf State Oil Sheik, unnamed Swiss banker, unnamed Fat Bangkok banker, unnamed surgeons, senior French Foreign Legion officers, French Foreign Legion soldiers, Tokyo Police, numerous underworld mercenaries, Gurkhas, and Major Flag.
Boom! Oh wow! Look at what a story!
Wow!
This is a whopper. This is a whopper.
Massive.
Like, this is, before we even get into the story, this is a crucial moment in Action Force history where the Red Shadows are effectively retired and we're introduced to a whole new toy line.
Yeah.
Cobra. It's amazing.
Yeah, I suppose like in real life, this was kind of like what was going on at Palatoy. We had them kind of, General Mills winding down toy operations and taking everything out of, Europe and the UK and basically bringing everything to the US. So Hasbro and, basically we're kind of looking at Palatoy now as more of a distribution hub, and they wanted to get their G.I. Joe product out still in the UK. So we basically just got in 1985 this re-release of G.I. Joe figures on Palatoy card backs. Now, obviously at the same time in the story, in the comic, they had to figure out a way to, sort this out. So that's where we get this issue. And yeah, Brian, take it away.
It's Friday the 13th. The Red Shadow fanatics orchestrate a number of terrorist attacks across the globe, which highlights Baron Ironblood as world enemy number 1. They attack a bullet train in Japan, an oil rig in the Java Sea, and hijack a Concorde aircraft in the Middle East. They threaten to blow themselves up and scores of innocent people that they've taken hostage unless the Baron is paid over £200 billion sterling.
Billion pounds. It's crazy. I did think Concorde was an interesting choice, and it kind of, at the time, that was like the symbol of high society, wasn't it? It was like if you got like a flight on Concorde, then you were definitely like rubbing elbows with the rich and famous, weren't you? Concorde
is a big deal. I mean, and obviously in the 80s, it was at the height of its fame. So, I mean, it makes sense to show that, like you say, the high society, the wealthy, the rich, the powerful, even they could fall foul to Baron Ironblood's evil machinations.
Yeah, obviously I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we get, obviously, one of my favourite scenarios, which we've discussed in the past on regular comics bursts from the Real American Hero line, is the oil rig usage here. And I just got all excited when I saw oil rigs in this issue and in this particular storyline. And I was thinking, oh, good, we're going to get like Action Force infiltrating. No, we're not. We are not getting anyone infiltrating anything. We just get a little shot of an oil rig, and then a little bit later on we'll come to why that's a short-lived. But another kind of really harsh thing from this first page is the fact that they've got the driver being thrown from the bullet train, which is obviously going, over 100 miles an hour at this stage.
Incredible. I mean, that is, we keep coming back to this. The violence in this comic this was a comic targeting kids. They didn't pull any punches. Guys getting gunned down, thrown out of windows. He's actually being thrown out the window, and he's being shot while he's being thrown out the window.
Just to make sure, though, aren't they? It's crazy. And anyway, as we move on through the story, the UN decides to give in to the demands of the Baron, but still gives the order to blow up the 3 bombs, killing both the Red Shadow fanatics and the hostages simultaneously, which, again, completely destroys any opportunity of going in and infiltrating this oil rig, which I was like, well, because I would have liked to see them, like, have to deal with each one of those situations as 3 separate teams, but it's almost like you're kind of taken one direction and then completely thrown in another, aren't you, in this particular case? It
actually was pretty unexpected, because typically in an Action Force story, they would not give in to Baron Ironblood's demands, and Action Force would go in and sort him out and save the day. This is a real turn of events in that they give in to the demands. So I'm reading this and going, hang on a sec, that doesn't add up. Why would they just give in to his demands? But then he doesn't back down. He goes ahead anyway with the order to execute the hostages, which almost seems even more crazy. And that was quite shocking. I gotta say, I was really taken aback when I kind of turned the page and he's greenlighting the execution.
I would say that what it does is it puts a massive target on his head, doesn't it? I mean, like, everyone knows it's the Baron that's behind it because he's the one that's been communicating with the UN. And it almost goes, well, not that he wouldn't have a big target on his head already anyway, but doing this surely just kind of like heightens the situation to like astronomical, events. And obviously, there's a reason behind that, but even then, it's not like that spotlight is shifted at any point. So effectively just bringing a shit ton of the world on top of him. Also, we get a senior general from Action Force, unnamed, but apparently he's a senior general from Action Force. He's got like the uniform on, and we don't really get much again from that guy, do we?
No, I mean, I think that is pretty much all we see. I mean, if you look back at the toy line, you do have like the Action or the Z-Force Commander,
yeah.
Could have been a good character maybe to use in that particular role, but I suppose the General makes him more over all 4 branches of Action Force, so it'd be safer to go with a more neutral character in that regard,
Yeah.
So Eagle and Skip are both in New York for the UN Counterterrorism Council conference, but go unused despite Action Force's vehement disapproval of the decision to give in to the Baron's demands. They notice movement in the building across the street, and it turns out to be Red Shadows. They're aiming missile launchers at the conference in a bid to increase the damage they've already done around the globe. But Eagle and Skip spring into action. With help from the local authorities, they neutralise the threat and kill the Red Shadow attackers.
Great to see Eagle and Skip together in action, isn't it?
It's one thing that you don't see enough of. I would feel in the Action Force stories is crossover between the teams.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant to see these 2 guys working together, like the 2 big heroes, really. And in this new era of Action Force, with a lot of the Hasbro characters coming on board, these guys are still retained and still have a life in the continuity, going forward, which is also super.
Totally. Yeah, something you mentioned that I've just done an episode on Talking Joe with Chief, and we were talking about the Cobra Civil War issue in the G.I. Joe Real American Hero run. And it's in a similar way that, they're not obviously changing characters or whatever, but Larry put in a ton of characters and vehicles because it was the big battle. It was the big Cobra Civil War that G.I. Joe were being involved in. And you just see loads of older characters being utilised. You see like loads of new characters coming in, and you see like every vehicle that they have on, at their disposal at that point. It's just they tried to fill it with as much as possible. I get the feeling that's what's being done here, but in a much smaller time frame. They're kind of going, damn, we need to get each team seen in this comic as much as possible. And as we continue, the resulting attacks lead the Council to proclaim the Baron as World Enemy Number 1, and Action Force are officially sanctioned to conduct raids on all known Red Shadow bases immediately. Meanwhile, the Baron's hints at his real plan to change his identity. So, again, like, here we see the big clue, don't we?
I mean, there he is kind of monologuing to himself, and right beside him is this terrarium with a live cobra in there. I love when Baron Ironblood monologues to himself, giving out about Action Force.
It's great, isn't it?
He's such a...
He is.
Action Force begin raiding multiple Red Shadow bases, including an ancient Ottoman castle between Turkey and the USSR, housing the Red Jackal. Just as the SAS force hit the castle, the Baron contacts Red Jackal and his troops, only to inform them that he is leaving them for dead and disappearing for good. SAS force storm the castle, killing many Red Shadows, but Red Jackal hides, takes out an SAS trooper, and puts on his clothes for a classic escape.
I mean, it's quite cliche, but again, it's a fun one, isn't it?
This escape has been done so many times in Hollywood. It works every time. Kill one of your opponents and dress up as them, and job done.
I like the fact it's like Eagle and then a bunch of just random Russian paratroopers, and they're all just dressed up as, as Sparrowhawk, effectively. And I kind of think like it's one way of them maybe saying, here's all of SAS Force. You can just guess that all of SAS Force are involved here, even though we're not showing them each individual character. It's almost like they're giving each team their final bow, aren't they?
As you say, all four teams get brought out for this global raid on the Red Shadow infrastructure, and they all go out with a bang, for want of a better term.
Yeah.
Even reference Eagle and Stakeout are both in this particular battle at the Russian castle, and I think afterwards, after the battle, Eagle remarks to Stakeout that it was one of the toughest battles they'd ever fought against the Red Shadows.
Yeah.
And there is a panel which you see from the castle being attacked, from a distance. It looks like an epic. It's just one small, tiny panel. It's an epic battle with like artillery, paratroopers, the whole lot. It's part of the genius of John Cooper, who can say so much with so little space. It's what I love about him as an artist.
It's a shame they didn't have more issues to really delve into each one of these little storylines. Like this, it could have, obviously, if they'd have known further in advance change that was going to happen, then they might have been able to kind of like build and spread this 7-issue run out to like a whole year's worth. Do you know what I mean? I just think that would have been really cool to have the entire battle between the SAS Force and the Red Jackal, to have that whole initial story to kind of spread over a bit, just a bit more time, so we could see them each trying to get to the hostages and something along those lines. As it is, we still get a really good run, but I mean, how good would that have been?
That's amazing, because if you look back at the history of some of these stories, like SAS Force, Operation Bloodhound, which we haven't yet covered on Disorder Battle, spans like well over 20 issues, maybe over 30 issues.
They were not shy of doing a long story arc, were they?
They were well able to do it, and clearly this is indicative of maybe some very fast changes in terms of the marketing and the content marketing, and they had to shoehorn this change in continuity into a very small window. But I think you're right, had they had enough forewarning, this could have been an amazing setup over 30, 40 issues. And all of these kind of 4 separate sub-stories would all link together and lead to one massive big reveal at the end, which would be amazing.
I would also say, though, as well, I think they did well to get 7 issues, kind of could get this kind of into 7 issues, because I think nowadays we had, what was that run, the Karen Travis run, the G.I. Joe one for IDW, she didn't get the entire run that she needed, and she had to cram everything into the last issue, and it just doesn't help the story, it doesn't help anybody, really. So, it's good that they even managed to get, a good 7 issues worth to get this kind of changeover done, and I think it was done really well. Anyway,
I did notice that there's 7 pages per issue on this particular story. That is actually an extra long issue. So normally the classic Action Force would be 5 pages. Yeah. So they pushed it out to 7 pages per issue, and this clearly to cram as much in as they could to not compromise the quality of the story. And look, let's not forget, the guy writing this is Jerry Day, the guy who created Rogue Trooper, one of the classic comics writers of that time.
Big time. And I suppose we do get a few more squeezed in now, which is what I was getting at before. So despite the raids, Baron Ironblood and Red Jackal are nowhere to be found, and hundreds of Red Shadows are wiped out. Back at the UN, discussions highlight the fact that even though he has lost a huge number of troops, Ironblood was paid a huge amount of money and would be able to rebuild his forces. And this is where we see Wheels, we see the Z-Force Jeep, we see the Q-Force Sea Lion, and we also, I'm guessing we see possibly Dolphin in there.
Oh,
I'd imagine.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd imagine it would be like Leviathan and Dolphin. And then we also see, obviously we see at the top, in that top panel, we see Skip and Wheels. I'm guessing it's Wheels because of what he's wearing and the fact that the Jeep's behind them. And then we're told, like, in the few panels below that Sky Raider and Leviathan have joined us in the UN, and that's really their only proper introduction, in a sense, isn't it?
I like how we kind of get that little flashback. It's obviously at the end of the raids, and there's a flashback there to Skip and Wheels, and they're just reporting in that no sign of the Baron. And then you will see the Sea Lion, obviously, in the aftermath of one of its raids, and they've no sign of the Baron. And then it looks like we have all four of our teams represented at the UN. Yeah. So you've got Skip, you've got Eagle, you've got Sky Raider, and you've got Leviathan in there. So that's great seeing the four leaders come together for that particular shot. I
mean, I suppose it's one way to get Q-Force and Space Force involved when, obviously they had the opportunity, I suppose, again, to have Q-Force doing the oil rig scenario. They had SAS Force to do either the bullet train or the Concorde. Either would have suited SAS Force and either would have suited Z Force. So they could have had those three doing that, and then maybe Space Force could have been giving them like information and comms and stuff from above, like satellite imagery and stuff like that.
Yes.
But again, like, we miss out on that a little bit. So they get kind of shoehorned in here, but at least we see them. At least we get that send off, which is nice. And
I think actually for Space Force and Q Force, this really is a send off.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of SAS Force action and some Z Force action, and obviously the issues to come after this. But I think it really is a swan song for Space Force and Q Force for sure.
Which is sad, isn't it? I mean, it's like they're two of my favourite teams as well, because there aren't as many characters involved toy wise in general, and they're kind of underutilized a little bit. Do you know what I mean? And I'd love to see more from them. Maybe in like the modern era somehow.
And some of the best vehicles ever.
I know.
With Q Force and Space Force.
I know, the Triad, the Sea Lion,
Cosmic Cruiser,
the friggin' Swordfish. I mean, damn.
They're all amazing. Oh man.
Anyway,
there's a lovely little panel here. We see Red Jackal crawling from like out of a cave or something. Obviously some SAS or maybe Sikorsky helicopters kind of flying off in the distance, and clearly he survived the onslaught. So on the back of that, Red Jackal continues his search for the Baron by squeezing old contacts for information. And Jammer finds some intel as to the whereabouts of Ironblood, but can only get a partial piece of recorded evidence just before Red Shadow dies. The trooper utters his last words, "My master, he is safely hidden in Ind." They discerned that the trooper could mean a number of jungle-type areas in the world, including India, Indochina, or Indonesia.
Yeah, and again, we're getting a few more farewells here, aren't we? As well as that element of the story, we get the hyena kind of being shown off by, Red Jackal's still got his hyena, basically, and he's tracking down all those different connections to the Baron to try and find information. And then we see Jammer, and we see, I'm guessing the Z-Force HQ that he's inside.
Yes.
And then obviously he's he's doing his kind of specialist work to isolate, going over recordings from the last raid. And so, we get like a good farewell from Jammer too. And it's like, oh, good. At least we're getting some really good characters getting a good send-off and being involved in the storyline rather than just the background.
Yeah, it's pretty full on with some of our kind of hero figures here from kind of both sides, particularly on the Z4 side in this sequence here, which is really, really nice. I do love these panels though with the hyena.
Yeah.
You see it racing out across the desert onto this kind of like runway, and it starts to take out a whole series of, it looks like, guards or military vehicles. And then
There it is. There's our Wilhelm scream.
it's in there. And obviously he takes out a plane as well, which I suppose kind of leads into, I suppose, more contacts that allow him to get a step closer to the Baron.
Shortly afterwards, Red Jackal finds the Baron in an ancient temple in one of the densest jungles in the world, but he is no longer the Baron. Now, he is...
Cobra Commander!
That's all the kids awake now in the house.
I'm so dead.
I just love you shouting that. So, I mean, this is the first appearance of Cobra Commander, and it's a real... I mean, as a kid reading this, which I wasn't, I was an adult reading this, way after the fact. I mean, this must have been such a great reveal. What a reveal.
I can actually vouch for being a kid and reading this and being blown away.
Yeah.
Obviously, as adults now, reading back over this, we know what's going to happen. There's no surprises. But as 1985, what age was I? 13?
26? Okay.
26, I was 28. I was totally gobsmacked by this because I didn't know who Cobra Commander was. I wasn't familiar with the Hasbro toy line. This was a whole new introduction to a brand new character in Action Force. A whole new world. Enemy number one. Hey.
A whole new world, enemy number one. Amazing. So, and even like, so you read this as a kid and were kind of had your socks blown off, obviously.
Yeah, blown away by this.
Now, I don't have the shock and awe. You know how like you see films and like classic films, and you might have heard about the reveal before you see the film, and then it's like, doesn't have as much of an impact. This still had an impact on me when I read it, and thus still one of my favourite reveals in a comic of all time. It's up there for me.
Oh, this is a Darth Vader, I am your father moment. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Hang on, what?
For a 13-year-old.
Hang on, what did you say? Darth Vader's
Spoiler
what?
alert. I am your father.
Thanks.
I am your father. Not true.
So Cobra Commander explains that he had surgery to change his appearance, and injections made him immune to cobra venom. He unleashes his snakes to kill Jackal. But when he hears that Red Jackal has managed to procure the wares to his massive fortune by interrogating his personal bankers and then killing them, Cobra Commander is forced to save Red Jackal, who in turn tries to kill him. But a hidden venom-spitting stone cobra spits in the Jackal's face, forcing him to stop in the middle of exclaiming that he would destroy the new commander. However, with the venom stopping him mid-sentence, Cobra Commander decides he will be called Destro from now on.
I love that. This is where I find the kind of comic writing back in the 80s very hokey and very just all the ways that they decide on how names are going to be said and stuff like that. And I just think that the way they gave Destro his name is just one of the hokiest ones to do, but at the same time, I find really, really good. I think it's brilliant, and I think what makes me laugh is the fact that he's got this mask, which is clearly which should be impervious to anything, and a bit of venom spits in his face, which you think that mask can deal with, and he goes nuts. Out comes the Wilhelm scream again. And then what makes me laugh even more is it somehow manages to change his appearance. What the was this venom? Just sounds like nanomites to me.
Oh, this is actually brilliant. Though, in the lead up to this encounter, Red Jackal's crawling through the jungle. I mean, he's in bits. His uniform's torn. He's kind of travelled halfway across the globe in a hyena tank. And he's constantly monologuing to himself about how he's going to destroy the Baron. I will find the Baron. I will destroy him. And he uses the word destroy over and over and over again. And in the few panels prior to this particular encounter, I think he uses the word destroy about 6 times.
Yeah. So it was almost like he uses it a lot, so that's what's going to happen, and they're going to cut it off mid-sentence, and Cobra Commander's, I like that. I like the fact he said destroy.
And I actually love this. He's actually gold. He grabs him by the neck and he's like, destroy!
Oh yeah, it's the Wilhelm scream. Double Wilhelm scream. We get the double scream on this one. Double scoop of ice cream. And I love the fact that the Cobra Commander as well, he's got this lisp. They're really playing up that snake angle, much like the Cobra Commander in the cartoon.
Destro, you said this is your new name. You know where my fortune is, and you will supply all I need for the Cobra cause.
Amazing. After killing the surgeons who helped Cobra Commander change his appearance, nice, he explains to Destro that they must get the word out in order to build their new force, and we are introduced to Major Blood and Storm Shadow. Blood is being court-martialed by the French Foreign Legion in French Djibouti, and Storm Shadow is in hiding when he hears that the police are onto him in Japan. So now we're getting loads more brutality with the killing of the surgeons. They really do not hold back in the comic, which again we say every time, but I think it does need mentioning in every story that we cover, because then it shows that, oh yes, it is brutal and it is constant. And then we see Major Blood and Storm Shadow for the first time.
I mean, this is amazing. Again, brand new characters for a 13-year-old. These brand new characters, and these guys were, I mean, these look pretty badass.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, really cool. I love the fact that Major Blood, the French Foreign Legion was a big thing back in the day, wasn't it? Like, it was one of those,
yes.
It was always looked at as that people would go there as like a last resort, and, you know, it was a place where you would be put through your paces, and there were a lot of criminals maybe operating there and hiding there in a sense to get away from something they'd done in the past. So Major Blood fits in really well with the French Foreign Legion, and the fact that he's getting court-martialed by them, I mean, what the hell has he done? Do you know what I mean?
I know, yeah. Well, I think his backstory, I think, is not too dissimilar from his G.I. Joe backstory, where he's massacred some of his own men. I think was it for cowardice or something like that?
Yeah.
And so he's being court-martialed for that. But of course, he's like, I'm not hanging around for this, mate. Can't do Australian accents.
That was brilliant. I can't wait for this, mate. I see you've played Knifey Spoony before. Yeah.
Oh dear. So Destro goes on a mission to spread the word, which leads to flocks of dangerous people attempting to reach Cobra Commander in his ancient temple hideout. Many die in their attempts, but Storm Shadow and Major Blood, who both manage to escape their personal situations, manage to avoid the traps and get to their destination successfully.
Yeah, this is fun. I mean, so Destro is now wearing his new uniform. Instantly, when I said it changed his appearance, it kind of, because they always drew Red Jackal with a kind of like very boxy or sharp kind of cheekbones, and certain details on the mask were always very sharp. And what the Venom did to his mask is it kind of softened it and made it a bit more like the one that you see in the cartoon for G.I. Joe and Action Force. So
yes,
now we see him, like, he's lost the shirt. He just took the shirt and got rid of it. He has somehow managed to change the collar to red, and maybe he's wrapped the shirt around it. I don't know. I doubt he'd be working with many textiles in the temple in the middle of the jungle, but whatever. He's somehow managed to procure this beautiful new uniform.
Well, you know what would happen if they did find a seamstress or
they'd kill him.
A tailor? They're dead by now, because they're killing everybody at this rate.
Maybe the surgeons made it for him. We'll never know. Yeah, and then we also get, the fact that he clearly harbours malice for Cobra Commander. He wants him dead, and they're setting up this kind of like precarious 1 and 2 Cobra position, aren't they?
And do you know what? That rivalry never goes away. They keep that between these two characters for the rest of the Action Force run, essentially, where Destro constantly tries to point out Cobra Commander's shortcomings, and Cobra Commander tries to humiliate Destro at every chance he can get.
They do that in literally every iteration of G.I. Joe and Action Force, don't they? They always have Destro and Cobra Commander kind of on the same team, but not. And then they even went so far as to separate Destro completely and have him have his own forces at one point with the Iron Grenadiers in the G.I. Joe line. So yeah, it's interesting that power struggle continues with us in the UK too. I mean, it's natural as well, isn't it, I suppose? Blood and Storm Shadow prove themselves, which is, again, kind of like showing off their qualities and why they should be in Cobra.
I actually think these are the first guys. So maybe a quick bit of backstory here is that Cobra Commander and Destro have set up these ridiculous booby traps, like a test for any potential new recruits. They have to get through the booby traps in order to get into Cobra. Blood and Storm Shadow are the first guys to actually survive the death traps by luring Destro and Cobra Commander themselves into a trap.
Brilliant.
And Destro was obviously, pretty off about this, but Cobra Commander is like, oh, both survived at last. I have found men fit for Cobra.
Can I just say as well that one bit that I should point out, that which makes me laugh again, is that he fires like this little venom thing at Major Blood, Cobra Commander, and it hits him in the eye patch and does nothing to him, right? Nothing at all. But it stops Major Blood in his tracks and makes him like ask Cobra what he was doing. And then Cobra Commander explains that this is venom that would have killed you instantly. I aimed for your eye patch, and if you know, so like, well, why did it stop him? Do you know what I mean? Like, why would doing that stop anyone and then make them like question the scenario? Like, you'd just be like, no, I'll continue what I was doing, which was trying to kill you in the first place. So I just found that hilarious. Again, like there's occasionally there's a little hokey thing in these stories, and as much as I do love the stories and I think they're really good and I think they're really entertaining and really well written at times, there are certain moments that make me go, even in the 80s I think that would have been a bit too much.
The old venom in the eye patch, I know, that's it's up there with the knifey spoony, mate.
You can tell Blood is an Aussie in this as well, can't you?
Bloody hell. I mean, they ham up the Aussie. What's he sitting there singing a song at one point?
He says Bonza at one point. He's mates all the time, singing Australian songs. Yeah, it's brilliant. I think he's great. He's such a good character in the Action Force comics as well. Like, it's just, he's so interesting.
We're only getting a little intro to him in this particular story. He gets his own stories in later issues to come, and we've got to cover them on here because he's brilliant.
Big time. As Cobra continues to rebuild their forces, the UN conducts their second counter-terrorism council in response and decides to employ an American major known as Major Flag to operate a reconnaissance over a large area from India to Indonesia in an SR-71 Blackbird, which was like the plane of choice back then, wasn't it? I mean, that was like, I was fascinated by the Blackbird. It was one of my favorite like planes, and there was so much mystery and secrecy like shrouded in it that it was like this, I don't know, this just like this kind of like dream jet, really, wasn't it?
It's like a sci-fi piece of sci-fi. It reminds me of the Clint Eastwood movie Firefox,
yeah,
where he steals the kind of the secret Russian jet. It's real. It's almost like the stuff out of fantasy. But what I love about this is that John Cooper, prior to getting on the Action Force material in Battle Action Force, he was the artist on Johnny Red.
Yeah.
And he has an amazing experience drawing planes, aircraft. And there's one little panel here where you see the Blackbird soaring through the sky, and John Cooper's work, his line work in this, the aircraft, the clouds. It's a tiny little panel, but it's just a beautiful piece of landscape or, airscape illustration. It's gorgeous.
Totally. And also, you mentioned movies, but I mean, the SR-71 featured really heavily in the movie Daryl, which was, I'm not sure what year that was. I'd have to double check, but
that's the 80s.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if it was prior to this or if it was after this. Either way, it was in the same era. And so like it's cute that they've got it in this, and then obviously you've got Major Flag. I mean, sounds very similar, doesn't it?
I mean, that is
to General
Flag. Yeah, I mean, it's in the Action Force, the Marvel Action Force comics. Did we have a General Flag or a Major Flag in that?
Yeah, General Flag there was a General Flag early on in the Marvel comics, and then he dies. And then his son, General Flag Jr., it's not really Junior, but it's General Flag again, he was released as a Battle Corps figure in the toy line, and it was mentioned in his bio that he was the son of this General Flag who passed away in the Marvel run. So we get a Major Flag, and I just think I think really it's more to do with the fact that flag is so synonymous with the USA, isn't it? Like the whole patriotism angle and flags and so on and so forth, that it just goes without saying that if you've got a character from America in it, they're going to go for the most obvious names, and Flag, I think, fits that quite well, doesn't it?
Absolutely, you're right, but there's no doubt about it that this is actually General Flag before he got promoted to be General. So, and clearly his incredible work tracking down the Cobra base is what warranted that promotion. Even though he actually doesn't track down the base and they give him the slip.
Americans are going nuts right now, going, no, he's not got nothing to do with General Flag, man. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, but he does.
I think you'll find that he does. Meanwhile, back at the Cobra Temple, a new threat appears for Cobra Commander when a camouflaged adversary threatens to kill him if he doesn't pay him $20,000 in gold. He does claim that he will work for him, though, and when Storm Shadow and Major Blood shoot the tree he's hiding in, they realise he isn't there anymore and he's made off with the gold. This leads Cobra Commander to assume he will work for them, and that mysterious character is...
Firefly!
I love this time. I left it for you to do. I just thought he'll pick this up. He'll know he's got to say this. Oh, yeah. This is an odd way to introduce Firefly, though, isn't it? Again, a little bit hokey for me.
Well, I suppose they're trying to show that this guy can really evade any kind of security or traps. And get the one up on Cobra Commander. But the fact that Cobra Commander just trusts him with the gold bullion, that this guy is actually going to be true to his word, that's a bit risky, Cobra Commander.
It's a bit, to me, it's like a little bit far-fetched. But again, I know what you're saying. They're trying to highlight the fact that Firefly is this super, brilliant saboteur, and also he can get behind his security forces like very easily. And you're talking Blood and Storm Shadow and a ton of Cobra troops, so he's done really well. But I think I would have preferred if he would have been a little bit more obscure, and this had been a little bit more thought out, rather than hiding in a tree and then not being in a tree. It just felt a little bit comical, the way it was done. But again, it does highlight how good Firefly is at what he does. He gets the money and he claims he's going to help them, and he does. So, there you go. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, yes. But clearly under pressure to cram lots of new characters and action figures and toys into this particular story. So Firefly is just another character on the roster of new toys getting a plug in here.
I do like his look in the recoloured issue that they did on Blood for the Baron. That darker deco looks so cool, doesn't it?
It is beautiful. It's beautiful. It doesn't credit who does the colours for that particular issue where we see him, but because obviously there's multiple artists do the colouring, but that is a particularly beautiful panel where you see him at the end running away through the jungle with the gold bullion bag hanging off his shoulder.
I probably will have to say this, you can definitely tell there are multiple people working on this, and rather than trying to copy each other's style, they've really gone and done their own thing with it, which, it's cool in certain kind of situations, but it does separate each story very dramatically for me. So I prefer to read this in black and white, in all honesty, and then, it's nice to have the colour, things. And everyone did a great job on it, but they did such a different job on it that each story kind of is quite separate, isn't it?
For sure. They look very, very different. However, I did have the chance to read this in the original black and white, because I do have these 7 issues in my collection. And looking back over those original pencils and inks by John Cooper, they're just so beautiful. And as good a job as the guys on Blood for the Baron have done, in my opinion, you cannot top the original work by John Cooper himself in black and white. So with Cobra in a position to attack, they do just that. Major Blood leads an assault on a local government garrison, with Storm Shadow and Destro leading their own teams elsewhere in the world. Major Flag is woken up once the attack in Southeast Asia occurs and springs into action in the SR-71 Blackbird. Cobra catch on to the spy plane and readjust their plans, and the multiple attacks have Major Flag flying in all directions to get as much intel as possible.
I found it quite interesting that they only have one guy running recon for the entire area. I would have preferred to see more Action Force characters towards the end to really give them a good send-off, but I guess they're trying to really keep it out of, so Cobra don't know that they're being watched. And obviously more people that would kind of create more paranoia. But, I just think it's odd that you've just got this one guy doing all of this work. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you're going to get some intel, and we're not going to do anything about any of these attacks. We're just going to get intel on it.
This is the part in the story where Space Force could really weigh in
big time
and kind of collaborate with Flag and the Blackbird, and as simple as just kind of satellite kind of tracking or pinpointing the various actions, coordinating the search from space. For sure, it's a missed opportunity.
Maybe they thought they were going to continue using some of these characters in future issues as well. Maybe they didn't think necessarily that more of the emphasis was on them trying to move things over to this new Action Force era, but they thought that they would still have the freedom to use all those characters from before in the stories, and I don't know, maybe that was on their minds.
Could have been a bit of that, but I do feel maybe decisions were made at Palatoy to really push or drive certain product in this, because the whole reason that this comic even existed is just to sell toys. And I'm sure Palatoy would have had a huge say in the content for Action Force. So that they clearly wanted to downplay the Space Force product at this point.
I should have asked Bob a few more questions about that, because I wonder who was because he didn't have any contact with the comic guys at all, Bob. But it would have come down to more marketing and, kind of like marketing directors and people on the marketing team for Palatoy that would have dealt with that, I think. So, I mean, what we should probably aim to do, Brian, is get someone on from the comics back in the day, or from Palatoy back in the day, who had that connection, and have an interview with them for a Disorder of Battle special.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that.
I'm going to have to send some feelers out then. In any case, Destro's Hiss Tank column gets attacked by Gurkhas, and when Flag hears the news, they rush to the Blackbird once again to gain more intel, but Firefly has sabotaged the SR-71. Flag realises there is a plastic bomb clamped to the plane, and it blows up, injuring the Major and almost certainly killing the pilot. I'm only guessing, but that's usually what happens to the unnamed characters in Action Force comics. Another Wilhelm scream, of course. And I guess Firefly's aggressive freelance ploy worked a treat.
Do you know what? What a way to do business.
I know. We should adopt that from now on. Forcefully edit random people's audio and video.
I love how Major Blood's attack just goes brilliantly. Storm Shadow's attack goes brilliantly. And Destro's attack just basically ends in a massive rout by the Gurkhas.
It's brilliant, isn't it? And now we don't have hyenas anymore. They're Hiss tanks, so everything's been repainted.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and fair play to the colorists who have picked up on these kind of changes in continuity and have reflected that in the flow of the story.
Maybe that's why they switched, styles in the coloring department to kind of like emphasize the difference between the original Action Force and the current era that we're involved in now.
Yes. The issue finishes with Flag in hospital going over the intel he had gathered, whilst planning to accelerate recruitment of Action Force to help battle this new threat of Cobra. Back in Asia, Cobra Commander speaks to his troops and states that this is only the beginning and they will expand to the rest of the world, spreading the poison to all other continents. All hail mighty Cobra!
Amazing. Just one thing, does that nurse have security clearance for those documents? He's just like reading them like it's a comic. And she's over the shoulder like, well, I'm gaining intel here, and then I'm going to take it to Cobra. It's probably the Baroness, isn't it?
She looks very stern, the face on her there. You should really rest, Major Flag.
No, I've got to read these really important, top secret documents in front of you with my oven mitts on. I know they're not oven mitts. I know he's been obviously badly burned. But still. I mean, this sets up for the recruitment aspect of Action Force, doesn't it, as we slowly switch over from the classic characters to the new team.
Absolutely, it's a great setup for all this new cast of characters to come in, and in fact, in this particular issue, there's another Action Force story, and it says next week. It's basically that there's a promo for a story coming next week, which is Duke.
Yes.
So it's Duke's introduction then to the world of Action Force.
Yeah, and then we get that quite periodically then with the issues, don't we? The kind of like intros for people. I also like how Firefly's tucked away, hiding again all the time. You see, literally the last panel, they're all doing the speech and the troops and everything, and he's just poking his head round the corner of the temple, like, you can't see me, I'm Superman. And
he's not fully in the fold yet. He just wants to sit on the outside before he kind of really gets in with the gang.
Man, I mean, dude, after one job, he can retire. So I don't know why he's even bothering. Maybe he just likes blowing up.
Do you know what? That's his raison d'etre.
Stop using big French words.
I do not know what you are talking about.
What you're talking about. No sign of the Black Major or Red Laser in these issues, which is funny when you think about who has appeared more in most recent G.I. Joe comics. But I honestly think this is just due to the fact that Red Laser was a Cobra Commander repaint and therefore couldn't be updated in the story because you've got Cobra Commander. And the Black Major was a 5-point of articulation figure originally and didn't get a Cobra update either.
You think of all the Red Shadow top brass. You've got Red Vulture, Red Wolf, Red Laser, the Black Major. None of them get a look in at all. They focus on Red Jackal only. Now, and which makes sense because they want to set him up as he was the Destro repaint, so they're going to reintroduce him as Destro. And you make a fair point that Red Laser is just a Cobra Commander repaint, so it's just repainting the toy. But still, we had some other key players there in the organisation. They could have gone down in a blaze of glory.
I'm really surprised we didn't see Red Wolf and or not even Red Wolf, but the Robo Skull. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm surprised we didn't see that, because that actually carried on being sold in the Palitoy in the 85 era. So, like, it went from a Red Shadow's Robo Skull to a Cobra Robo Skull, without even any thought. So I'm surprised we didn't actually see that in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of maybe missed opportunities for other kind of characters or vehicles and even some of the teams to kind of play out in the story. But at the same time, it was clearly a response to a quick decision or a sudden decision to shift tack in the toys. And Jerry Day, I think, did a pretty good job, and obviously backed up by John Cooper's amazing artwork. I think the guys did something pretty special.
Do you think Major Blood got in the way of Black Majors being used? Do you think they looked at that hierarchy and thought Major Blood, Black Major, maybe we stick with the one Major in this team now?
That could have been a face-off between Black Major and Major Blood, and maybe Major Blood takes the Black Major out.
And then becomes Black Major Blood. Anyway, what an absolutely stunning issue, eh?
It is brilliant.
Stunning issues, I should say. It's over a number of issues, but this story is brilliant, isn't it?
It's a classic, and reading this again this week for the first time in years, it really brought me back to my childhood, and that wow moment where Cobra Commander reveals himself for the first time.
Pulls his pants
down.
When Cobra Commander reveals himself for the first time. Look at my snake!
And squirts venom into Destro's face.
This has gone completely wrong at the end, but still. Okay, we don't give potatings for these issues, but I'm going to give this 28,000 potatings because it's so good. That's
a major graphic you're going to have to make for that. But yeah, 28,001 potatings.
Great. I'll just have to add an extra one after doing all the work for the first bit of Photoshop. No, I'm not even going to include that. But still, what an absolutely stunning series of issues to kind of go from the Red Shadows to Cobra. I mean, it's big, it's bold, we've gone from red to blue, and yeah, what an amazing, I just love it. I think it's great. It's probably one of my favorite stories just because of the historical significance of it. And
it's one where the bad guys, they win.
Yeah.
They actually
number of times.
They win a number of times, and it's which is very, very rare. The good guys always come out on top, but in this particular series of issues, the bad guys consistently get one up on Action Force, and it's nice to see that for a change.
I suppose it makes sense to rebuild for a new team by breaking down the other one, and to do that they have to lose quite significantly. I mean, it could have been a lot worse, couldn't it? What they could have done is killed a lot of characters off to never be kind of seen again, which is something that they never really shied away from in the past. And maybe that was really just as a mark of respect. They didn't want to do that because of the great stories they'd done previously with these amazing characters.
I think so. They are great characters, and again, these were characters for kids, and all, even though they might have stopped or reduced quantities of these toys on shelves, we all as kids still had all of these great Q-Force, Space Force, SAS Force and Z-Force characters in our collections at home.
Yeah.
And still played with them, so they were still relevant to us as kids. So I think they were treated with respect in the story, but the new guys in the continuity really get to shine in this.
Big time. Anyway, Brian, thank you for jumping on this very special episode of Disorder of Battle.
Thank you. This was a great one.
It was good, wasn't it? Only an hour long, so that's good. That's what you get on the 4th of July, guys. You get an hour-long podcast of me and Brian talking about a comic that's like hundreds of years old. So you're welcome. But big shout out to Cobra Convergence big shout out to HCC 788 Hooded Cobra Commander for inviting us to do this, or to contribute for this one. It's been an absolute pleasure. That's it for this very special Cobra Convergence 4 instalment of Disorder of Battle. Thank you to my co-host Brian Hickey, to our sponsors Dublin City Comics and Collectibles, and Hooded Cobra Commander 788 for inviting us to contribute to this amazing month. See you next time, and as always,
All hail mighty Cobra!
I was always going to let you do that. Make sure you get involved with the discussion by liking, sharing and commenting on these videos, and as always you can keep up with the show after listening by following on Twitter @The Full Force, liking the Facebook page facebook.com/The Full Force, and if you would like to contact the show you can message us on either of those platforms with feedback or questions. We have also started a Patreon page, so if you want to see your name up in lights on these videos or enjoy exclusive bonus content, then check out patreon.com/The Full Force Podcast, or click the link on any of the posts this podcast appears in. Full Force. And a big shout out to our sponsors, Dublin City Comics and Collectibles. Located at 46 Bolton Street, Inns Quay, Dublin 1, Ireland, you can visit their website at dublincitycomics.ie and on Facebook at facebook.com/Dublin City Comics. Cobra is taking over this month with Cobra Convergence 4. The entire month of July will be turned blue thanks to Hooded Cobra Commander 788 and a plethora of G.I. Joe related YouTubers, podcasters and much, much more. Following this episode and dropping tomorrow will be our friends at G.I. Joeberg, so make sure you check them out and every other Cobra Convergence 4 contributor over the 31 days of July. All hail Mighty Cobra.